And I will pass it over to Paula. Take it away.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Rose Tocchini, our host.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, afternoon, depending on which coast you're on. Welcome to the April Alive Academy for 2021. I am so pleased that you all could join us today for the webinar, Make It Personal, Building Inclusion in Your Volunteer Corps, with Paula Allen, Emily Brome-Bauer, and Nicole Smith presenting. Can you move it to the next slide? Thank you. I wanted to go over the agenda very briefly. First, we'll deal with some housekeeping notifications quickly. We'll have the introductions, and of course, we're all here for the presentation. We've set aside time for questions and discussions afterwards. Stay tuned at the end of the webinar to learn more about upcoming Alive Academy sessions. For housekeeping, if you're having trouble with audio or visual today, you've got some options. You can keep us streaming on your computer, keep the video streaming on your computer, call in from your phone with audio only. If you're having trouble with your bandwidth, sometimes that can help. Put any other tech support questions you might have in the chat box to presenters only, and Gretchen will sort you out. Speaking of the chat box, if you want to talk to all attendees, make sure you choose that function. Otherwise, you're just talking to me and Gretchen. And we do, well, that's fine. We do want to encourage you to chat with one another and share your experiences. We'll be monitoring questions in the chat as we go along. I could not be more honored to introduce Paula Allen, Emily Brome-Bauer, and Nicole Smith, your presenters today. Paula Allen is the Vice President of Programs and Advocacy with Alive. In addition to being the Volunteer Program Specialist for Satellite Healthcare, Paula has a master's in museum studies and a certification in volunteer administration. She prizes the opportunity to work in the community of professionals to advance inclusive and proactive practices, particularly in the areas of strategic planning, risk management, and diversity and inclusion. Emily Brome-Bauer is a recognized professional volunteer and community engagement specialist. Over the past 3 decades, she's developed and managed effective volunteer programs that have been transformative for volunteers, organizations, and communities. These programs increase volunteer commitment, retention, and impact while leveraging volunteer and community engagement to build an organization's capacity to achieve its goals. Nicole R. Smith is a workforce development specialist, motivational speaker, and published author. She's the manager of volunteer and internship services at the Adrienne Arsht Center for the Performing Arts of Miami-Dade County. She staffs more than 100 performances and programs each year with volunteers and leads a team of interns, which serves 13 departments. In addition, she's an accountability coach for Center's apprenticeship program and has worked as a mentor with the School to Work Big Brothers Big Sisters program for 2 years. So thank you so much, everybody. And I'm turning it over to Nicole, Emily, and Paula for the presentation.
Let me just switch out our screen here. Nicole, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Again, good afternoon, good morning, depending on which coast you are on. Just wanted to say I hope you have your pens and pencils ready because there's going to be a lot of info in here. So again, make it personal, building inclusion in your volunteer corps. We're going to be talking about success stories, cautionary tales, and most importantly, practical exercises to help you implement all of these things that we're going to be talking about today. So the outline or the agenda of what we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about the I in DEAI, diversity, equity, accessibility, but today we are talking about inclusion. We're going to be talking again about success stories, things that have worked, cautionary tales, things that we tried and didn't work, or things that we saw other people did and took notes about that didn't work. And then we'll be giving you some practical exercises. We'll be practicing some of them actually during the presentation to help you, not only just for you, but also to take back with you. One of the biggest things before we can really talk about what we want to do in our volunteer program, it has to start with us. We have to look at us first and take the first steps, because anything that is going to cascade from there is going to begin with us. And that is what this is about. That is why we called it Make It Personal, because it starts with you.
Emily, do you want to take us into the poll?
Okay. So we're going to start off with just a poll to see how each of us feels in our personal professional level of confidence in addressing inclusion. And the most important thing about this is, and we'll be talking about this a lot during this webinar, is about creating a safe space. And that's what we want to have right here, is a safe space. So be honest. Tell us how you really feel about your personal professional level of confidence. Gretchen will pull up the poll. I think, yes. Is Gretchen there? Hello, Gretchen. There it is. So let's take a few minutes to pull up the poll to answer honestly, and then we'll talk about it at the end.
We're getting some good voting in progress. We're almost up to 88% voter turnout. Wow, that's awesome. Good job, guys. And I'll just give a few more seconds here for the poll to end, and then I'll share the results and I'll close it down in a few moments. Okay, here come the results.
Wow, that's very interesting. So a lot of us, 50%, half of us answering, say that we're pretty sure we've got some good ideas. And that's a great way to start. A few are worried about making a mistake, and that is very, very natural. We're going to talk a lot about that. That's like what Nicole said, we have to start with ourselves, so that's perfect. And a few people are not sure where to start. I think what our goal is of course, I'm well practiced at addressing inclusion, but if we go to the next slide. I think that's you, Paula, to the next slide. There you go. If you go to the next slide, this is a really good diagram. This diagram talks about learning something new. We all start in our comfort zone, and then we move into a fear zone, into a learning zone, and a growth zone. So even if you were to feel totally confident, and none of us do, right? But even if we did feel totally confident about our ability to be inclusive, to have inclusive programs, we'll still be in the growth zone. There is still something more that we can learn. So this is a really good slide. Go ahead and find yourself within this diagram and know that no matter where you are, number one, no matter where you are, that's okay. Hopefully you'll get a few ideas from this webinar to move us into the next zone. And also know this, that just because you're here at the webinar today means you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and start the process of growth. So thank you for joining us today. So we're going to start with a few definitions, a few reasons why we want to talk about this topic. We're going to talk about what is DEAI, what does that mean, and then why is that important? And then especially like Nicole said, we're going to talk about inclusion and what's the difference between inclusion and diversity and why inclusion is so important.
I'll take us into some definitions here. So diversity is the psychological, physical, and social differences that occur among any and all individuals. And the reason I think it's important to have these definitions is because we're doing this training for ourselves first, but then we're going to go out, we're going to take this back to our staff, back to our volunteers, and we all need to sort of start on the same page when it comes to definitions and then beginning our work. So equity is that guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. These all come from the Diversity Best Practices Glossary of Inclusive Terms. I find it interesting that accessibility is the only term not on their glossary. Accessibility is the quality of being able to be reached or entered. And a lot of people feel that equity, accessibility is folded into equity, but I think it's worth stating it outright for itself until it's such an afterthought that we don't even have to worry about accessibility. We've designed everything So everything is accessible to everyone. And until that point, I'm going to include it in all of our statements. So inclusion is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. And the important part here is that diversity can mean bringing different people to the table, but inclusion is making them feel welcome. So if you needed a business case for why build inclusion in the first place with your organizations, if you're looking to take something back to your senior management, organizations with inclusive cultures are 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, and 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. So if you've ever struggled as to why you should have more volunteers and more places in your organization, this is the slide for you. We want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. This whole webinar actually stems from a comment I asked last year's presenter, Lexi Bolins, about intersectionality. And she was like, whoa, that's a whole nother like DEAI 201 presentation. And I was like, challenge accepted, let's do that. So it's my statement here that building inclusion or any DEAI work needs to include an understanding of intersectionality, because intersectionality, as coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw from Columbia Law School, is describing bias as a more layered and intersectional effect. So it's a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem, a gender problem, a class, or an LGBTQ problem. Many times the framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. So she used it first as a Black woman. You know, she's both Black and a woman, and therefore those compound rather than pigeonhole her on one side or the other as terms of the bias that she deals with in society. So how do we honor diversity and intersectionality as we build inclusion? No individual is one thing. We're all a compound of many different identities. You need to remember that no one is a monolith or the sole representation of any piece of their identity. So the assumptions and the stereotypes that we make are often based on something we can see, right? We know assumptions are never accurate, but 70% of disabilities are unseen. So even if you're going off what you can see from someone else, you're not getting the entire picture. So as professionals, we all need to create an environment where people's differences are celebrated and provide value to our organizations rather than being considered a drawback. And if you create an environment where their differences are celebrated, then you're more likely to have them feel like they can come to your organization as a full and complete person and be welcomed and included. Emily, I'll turn it over to you for cultural competency and cultural humility.
Thank you. So carrying on from that, from what Paula had just said, inclusion means making diverse people, each with their own intersection, now that we've introduced intersectionality, of diverse designations, making them feel welcomed, that their whole self is being respected, understood, and in a safe place. And how do we do that? So one way of doing that, a very effective and increasingly popular way of doing that, is to look at cultural humility. So a few terms first, and then we'll talk a little bit about what cultural humility is and how we can use it. First of all, culture is a set of learned beliefs, traditions, principles, and guides for individual and collective behaviors that members of a particular group share with each other, whether it's women, you're Black, your race, your ethnicity, socioeconomic background. These are all the things that form a culture. Cultural competence, which I'm assuming a lot of us have already heard about, this describes our ability to interact effectively with people who have cultural experiences, beliefs, practices, and values, and ways of communicating and traditions that are different from our own. This is opposed to cultural humility, which is a process of self-evaluation that focuses on how our cultural influences, on our perception, focuses on how our culture influences our perceptions of other communities and the impact that has on our ability to participate in successful cultural exchanges. So let me explain a little bit more. Cultural competence is very important, but cultural competency implies that you can learn everything about people who are different from you and then become competent in interacting with them. This perspective, number one, is ego-centered in that it's about what I learn about you. Secondly, it tends to ignore that very important piece that Paula was talking about, intersectionality, and it tends to ignore the complexity of individuals. And that's where cultural humility comes in. Cultural humility starts with self-reflection, but then it's about opening up to learning about the other people and their very complex intersectional who they are, their whole identity. Cultural humility is the lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique on our own cultural values, beliefs, norms, assumptions, biases, and worldview. The humility part of cultural humility is our willingness to truthfully assess our own assumptions, even when it means stepping out of our comfort zone, and to acknowledge the gaps in our knowledge and being open to new ideas, even when those new ideas are contrary to our original beliefs or they are uncomfortable. It's a willingness to learn, and it's lifelong. Cultural humility so we're going to talk a little bit more about cultural humility and cultural competency, and we have some handouts for you. If you have any questions about that, please put that in your in the chat. Cultural humility, the self-reflection part, is how we learn about our own unconscious biases and where we're coming from. And that's our next slide. So we can go ahead and turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Emily. Perfect segue. So here's the thing. How many of you all have ever heard somebody say, oh my gosh, but I'm not biased, right? Have you maybe even said it? Like, you don't have to raise your hand, but answer is wrong. We all have bias. It's not that we do or do not have bias. It's what we do with it, right? So for example, I am biased towards homes that have asphalt in the front, like driveways. Reason being, when I was younger, when we lived in Texas, my mom had an acre of land and I had to cut the grass all the time. So now anytime we're looking like to buy a house, I'm like, can we get one that doesn't have grass? Because I'm not trying to cut grass anymore. Is it a bias? Yes. Does it really hurt anybody? No. What happens when our bias allows us to make assumptions about other people that can then cause a negative interaction. Those are the ones that we have to be careful with. So the thing is about unconscious bias. The crazy thing about it is it's unconscious, which means you have it and you're not even physically or just you're not even aware that you have it, right? We are bombarded with about 11 million pieces of information on a daily basis, but we can only process about 40. So we start to create shortcuts. So for example, if you go into the kitchen and the stove is on and the burner is red and you put your hand on it and you burn your hand. The next time you go into the kitchen and the burner is on, the stove is on, the burner is red, you know not to put your hand on there. Because why? You know you're going to burn your hand. You've created that shortcut. It's one of those things that keeps us alive in a lot of instances. But it's those things that there's certain things that we just don't have to keep relearning because we've created that shortcut. What happens is when we create incorrect shortcuts. So I always like to talk about myself and my people all the time, right? So if you've had an interaction with me, and my family is from Central America, we are Latina, we speak Spanish, all of that. So if you have an interaction with me the first or second time and I act crazy, and then you meet 2 or 3 other Panamanians and they act crazy, by the time you get to the 5th one, you're like, all Panamanians are crazy, but that's not the case. But because of the interactions that you've had, you start to create this shortcut that all Panamanians are nuts. But we have to be careful. Those are the shortcuts that we have to be careful of. And one of the beautiful things, a tool that we wanted to throw out to you is the Harvard's bias test. It literally is a test. You go, you take it, you answer questions, and it can tell you what you are biased towards or against. So that, I think it's a link that we have that we'll be able to provide to you. But I wanted to take us into this other amazing test that we can do right now that will help you trick your unconscious bias. And it's a quick exercise. And please, I hope everybody will do it because it's kind of mind-blowing, gotta tell you.
Let's start with a brain exercise. I'm going to ask you to visualize 3 scenarios. The visualization part is very important. So please close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine you're late to catch a flight. You rush through the airport, you make it through security, you run to the gate, you make it down the jetway, you step on the plane just as they close the door behind you, and the pilot steps out of the cockpit to say hi. You get to your destination, you go to a local restaurant, and you have the best meal of your life. I mean, really enjoy this. There's no calories in visualization. And at the table next to you is a couple happily celebrating their anniversary. The next morning, you go to the biggest technology conference in the world, and the CEO of this year's hottest tech startup just took the stage to speak. Now you should have a solid picture of all of that. So open your eyes, because I have some questions for you. In your mental image, was the pilot Black? Was the married couple 2 men? Did the tech CEO on stage look like me? It's okay if one or all of your answers is no. Your brain creates images of what's familiar. It's less of a fan of what's not familiar. The things I mentioned are generally less familiar. The Black pilot, the same-sex married couple, the female tech CEO. No matter how much you might love the idea of those things, when immediately confronted with them, the amygdala, that's the most ancient part of your brain, signals the hypothalamus to fire up the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is where the brain and the endocrine system intersect. So at this point, your adrenal glands, long before you have the chance to consciously think, I'm so happy these 2 men have the freedom to marry who they love.
Thank you, Paula. So let me tell you, the first time I did that, I was just, number one, I was blown away. And I thought it couldn't have been explained more beautifully about what our unconscious bias is. And I gotta tell you, I gotta be honest, like, I was like, dang it, I didn't even think the pilot was Black. What's wrong with me, you know? But how can I be mad at myself? It is just a result of my experiences and how my lived experiences. It was just a result of that. Just really quick, I do this with my volunteers in our sensitivity training. And one lady was like, well, when she said pilot, I immediately thought of my dad, because our experiences are what creates this. And it goes back again to, yes, we all have bias, but it's what we do with it that can make it dangerous. Can you go to the next one, Paula? So we just wanted to touch a little bit on microaggressions, because sometimes people don't even realize that what they're saying can be offensive. A microaggression is a term used for brief and commonplace daily verbal behavior and environmental indignities, whether intentional or intentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative, prejudicial slights and insults towards any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. So when somebody said, like, when we were doing this with my volunteers, he admitted that one time, like, he had taken somebody to the, I think his mother had come to the doctor. He had to take his mother to the doctor, and they were waiting for the surgeon. And he was like, this beautiful woman comes up. She's like model, like, and 2 seconds before he let it come out of his mouth, he was like, oh, I wonder where the surgeon is. Because in his head, somebody that beautiful wouldn't be in the medical field. She'd be off modeling. But it turns out she was the surgeon. He was so glad that he didn't say anything, because can you imagine how many times something like that has been said to her, where it can get old? And it can be like, why? Because you're pretty, you can't be a brain surgeon at that. Next slide, Paula. So, drop in the chat. What are some microaggressions that you have encountered? Are there some that you may have said? Does this list resonate with anybody? Maybe you've said it. Maybe you've been on the receiving end. The way I like to talk about microaggressions is what intent and impact. That's the difference between intent and impact. Because, for instance, if we're in a kickboxing class and you turn around and do a round kick and you kick me in the stomach and I'm on the floor, I can't breathe because you just knocked the air out of me. I know you didn't mean to do it, but it doesn't mean it didn't hurt, right? So we have to be aware, and this is where doing our part to learn about what we can do to be better really comes into play. I'm not sure if people have dropped anything in the chat because I can't see it, but this is just a sample. I think in our resources, we put some more in-depth, like a chart and everything, but we just wanted to at least touch on it and bring it to light. I encourage you to do a little bit more research into it, and just being aware is at least the one step that you can do that will make it even that much better. Paula?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about success stories next. But I think an important segue from microaggressions into success stories is, how are you going to find success? What you're wanting to do is build staff buy-in to increase diversity, and then create a culture change to make people feel welcome. And an important part of that is proactively addressing issues that'll affect the team, and microaggressions is absolutely one of those issues. I think a lot of the time we don't feel prepared to address these amongst staff or among volunteers, or even to a supervisor or a boss. So this resource here is from Susan Sanow, The Art of Managing Up and Down for Volunteer Managers. It's free. It was part of Points of Light 2020 last year. You can go follow this link once we send out our resources page and see her whole presentation. The beauty of building a conversation to manage up or to manage down is it is essentially the same conversation. So you're going to get really good at practicing this. But if you ever saw something in your organization where you're like, oh, I've got to do something about that, or that's an issue, I don't know who's going to do something about that. A, I deputize you right now to be the person who starts the conversation to do something about that issue. And B, offer this set of tools to do your own research and work your way through this. So you're going to identify the problem with the person, you're going to explain the implications for the organization, give some options, and then involve them in the process. What do you think? What should we do? Listen to the feedback, negotiate that response. Then you're going to repeat your plan of action, email the write-up of your plan of action so that everyone's absolutely on the same page. We all know the worst part of communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So verbal agreement, written agreement, and then update as appropriate. And Nicole and I are going to take you through some success stories of how we have built inclusion, and I'll turn it over to Nicole just briefly for her part, and then we'll come back to me.
And Paula,
Yes, so I would,
Nicole, if I could just jump in, we do have a couple of questions in it.
Okay.
Want to know if you want to take those now before you go on to this next section?
Sure.
Okay.
okay.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm sorry. One is, what
okay.
tools do you have to combat microaggressions in policy / requirements for volunteers at institutions where you don't have seniority?
Was it what rules do we have?
What tools?
Oh,
Tools.
tools. Well, part of what we do is we do the sensitivity training and we kind of lay out expectations. We tell people and show them this is what they are. And then we let them know that we have a no tolerance policy. And so if something, we encourage people that if they feel as though somebody has made a microaggression towards them, to let us know. And we will either encourage them to speak with the person, or if it's something that we need to research and have that a joint conversation with everybody, we give the opportunity to educate. And then if they continue to want to operate in that mode that they were in, then at that time, we just kindly suggest that this may not be the place for them to volunteer. But the thing is, people have to not only know, but they have to be held accountable.
Gretchen, we actually talk about this a little bit later, and it's also included in the handouts when we talk about cultural humility. That talks a lot about how to handle these kinds of situations, how to introduce it at your orientation and things like that. So yes, we do share some tools for
Okay.
just this later on.
Thank you. And one other question is about the exercise around assumptions. How do we retrain our brains plus help colleagues or volunteers retrain their brains, beyond where?
The beautiful thing about that is the video that we shared. We're going to share out the whole thing. And if you watch the whole thing, she goes through a detailed list of exactly how to do just that. We can elaborate a little bit, but I'm just concerned that we are not going to get through everything because we have a lot to share. But to answer that question, even if we don't get to it now, the video, watch the whole thing. She's phenomenal, and she literally addresses that.
Thank you. That's all I've got. So carry on.
Okay. Thank you. We wanted to talk about advocacy because in the position that we are in as we are going through this journey, some of us are going to be in a position to be able to help others, and some of us are going to be in a position where we need the help from others. And so I have had the opportunity to be on both sides of that. So I just wanted to share what that looks like. Kind of what I was mentioning a little bit earlier about training our volunteers. We make all of our volunteers go through a sensitivity training, and we give them perspectives on everything. And it's not just, when we talk about diversity for us, it is not just about race and cultures. Diversity to us is also inclusion in terms of abilities. But not only that, it goes down to the newer volunteers versus volunteers who have been here for a while, because that's a whole nother set of issues that we've had to work with, or people who've been here for a while, they feel entitled and not very welcoming to the newer volunteers that were coming in. So one thing I want to make sure is that we open a perspective of what inclusion is, because often it's the race and culture and ability and these, but it's even, does every volunteer position at your organization have a voice, have a seat at the table? So when we created our advisory team, it's 8 volunteers, but it's made up of the audio describers, the tour guides, the ushers, the admin, every position that we volunteer. So if we make any type of decision for any particular that's going to cover all the volunteers, does it affect different volunteers differently? And then one of the other things that we've done is we started ASL for theater, basic ASL for theater, so that when the theater does open back up, that's one aspect of inclusion that we've been working on to be a better ally to our guests who are deaf. It's a small thing. It's, is it anywhere where we could be? Absolutely not, but is a lot further than when we were? Yes. So in terms of advocating for those who are not at the table, those are that's some of the things that you do. And also one of the things that you'll hear about is not for us, without us. So if you're making decisions, and this is really applicable to the advisory team, if you're making decisions for the volunteers, or if I'm going to make a decision that affects the tour guides, but I don't have a tour guide at the table to ask how it affects them, that's a problem. Their voice needs to be heard because they're going to bring a perspective that we haven't even thought of. On the other end of that, on this diversity journey, and I've had a lot of friends who are like, oh my goodness, you know, what can I do? What can I do? You know, I haven't really had some of these challenges, but how can I help? And I had a friend actually say, I feel so bad that sometimes, she's like, I have a seat at the table often, and often I just want to give it up. I just want to get up from the table and give it to, somebody who is a minority to have that seat at that table. And I was like, no, don't ever do that, for two reasons. Number one, when you get up and walk away from the table, you take the relationships with you, and you are setting that person up to fail. What you do is, if you're sitting at the table, bring them to the table with you, because through those relationships, they're going to learn to trust you and then learn to trust me. But if you get up and leave, they're going to be mad at you. They're going to feel like this was forced, but let it be more of a partnership. If anything, don't get up from the table, help bring people to the table with you. So I bring up Arch Magazine for a reason, because with all of the work that we were doing with the volunteers, the center decided, because they just started a magazine, it's a quarterly magazine, and they're like, oh, we want to do an article about the volunteers. And I was like, fantastic. So all of this work that we were doing, when the PR person wrote the article, she combined the work that I did with a coworker of mine who happened to be a white male. And I was like, there's a couple of things that it didn't sit very well, because number one, he was credentialed, and people, no matter what you think, people tend to listen to the weight of a credential, even if they don't necessarily know what it is. Oh, there's credentials there. It's why we're trying to get my CVA, but that's a whole nother discussion. Anyway, so I was like, well, the way you made it sound was all of the work was 50-50, but in actuality, I was doing the heavy lifting, and then was like, hey, can you help me? And he was like, absolutely. But the ideas were coming from me. I was reaching out to organizations. I was setting up the meetings. I was doing everything, but the way it was presented, that both of us were doing everything, and it just didn't sit right. So it was difficult for me, number one, to even speak up and say anything. That's the hardest thing, but you have to do it. And so I went to my supervisor and I was like, look, in the off chance that I'm sounding like I'm being selfish or that I want all the attention, I want to let you know why this doesn't feel okay. Long story short, I had another conversation with the person in PR, and even though they did not completely understand where I was coming from, they did understand that it didn't sit right with me. And because of that, they were like, well, we don't really relate. We don't 100% understand, but we do feel how hurt you are by this. And we do understand that it's not sitting right. How can we rewrite this to make sure that you feel like you are properly represented? The article ended up getting rewritten. And not only was I given credit for starting the programs that I actually started, there was a colleague of mine who wasn't mentioned at all in the article, who also was doing a lot of the heavy lifting and didn't even get mentioned. So as they rewrote my aspect, I was able to make sure to bring him into it too. So small thing, I don't even know who read the magazine, probably know, who read it. We're hoping, a lot of people read it. Maybe they did. People will read it. It may not mean anything to them, but it's huge to me, because as I'm talking to other people about what we're doing in our volunteer program, I have this as digital evidence of things that I've done, and it shows that I am capable of being a self-starter, taking initiative, and doing things to create programs for an organization, whereas the way it was written before made it sound like I was just under the instruction or had to have somebody else before I could make any type of move towards what I was trying to accomplish. So I know that was a lot to take in, but all of it is important. And if there's anything that you take away from this one slide, the most difficult thing of all of this is speaking up. Do not allow how you feel to silence you. Speak up. At the very least, even if they say no or you're crazy, okay, but at least you took the chance of speaking up. I personally, even when I said, and I'm going to wrap it up because I know we have a lot of stuff to talk about, but even when I was like, you know what, I'm not comfortable about this, I think I'm going to say something. My mom was like, girl, they're not going to listen to you. And she did it not out of being mean or whatever. It's called experience of being a Black Latina female in white America. She was like, those people are not going to listen to you. It's not that big a deal. It's not going to change. And I was like, well, Mom, the least I can do is at least say something and give them the opportunity, because who knows what could happen. And I'm glad I did, because now it's a story that I can share with you all.
Mm-hmm. So important. I'm here to tell you about a time where I listened to someone who brought up a microaggression that wasn't acceptable. So this is a managing down example of a one-to-one conversation between myself, the volunteer coordinator, and a volunteer. So at a former job site, visitors of Asian descent took a tour at a historic house museum, and the docent was, talking through everything and referred to one of the historical figures in the house as Oriental. Now, the visitors finished the tour, thanked the docent, but they came back and they sent an email to me the next day and just said, it's just not sitting right with us. It's a little disturbing that the docent referred to this person as Oriental. We weren't terribly, terribly offended, but it's just still not right. And my response to them was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. If no one ever says anything, we don't have the opportunity to do better. We don't have the opportunity to change. So, thank you for bringing this forward. I'm gonna do something about this situation. So I asked my docent to come in and chat. First I started off that conversation by thanking her for her dedication to the museum and all the hours she put into tours. And then I pointed out the issue with the word and the welcome of our visitors. So, using that managing up and down script. And the docent herself was just mortified. She immediately understood why it was an issue. She said to me, I can't even believe I said that. But instead of using that as I can't even believe I said that, I'm sure I didn't, she said, I can't believe I said that. I want to make sure I never do it again, right? So together we made a 2-week plan. We rewrote that section of her tour. She practiced it. I got her in touch with some other docents that she could practice, with. So it wasn't just with me because she was feeling pretty nervous. And then she went back out onto the floor with visitors and she did her tours. She successfully retrained. She never used that particular word again to describe historical figures of Asian descent. And she later said that she felt respected and honored that I came to her and said, hey, we've got an issue with this word. We need to figure out a way around it. What do you want to do? I involved her in that resolution. And it is the way I suggest you deal with issues that come up in your areas. Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you to discuss cautionary tales.
So we've talked about our successes, and now we're going to talk about a few cautionary tales. Not many, but we do want to talk about how developing an inclusive and diversified organization is really complicated. I think you've seen this, in our examples from Nicole and Paula, our successful ones. And it's not only about developing recruitment and onboarding strategies to bring on diverse volunteers. There are also that managing up the organizational culture and the systems to think about, the infrastructure, policies, processes, things like that. But they're also talking about individuals. So you've had 2 examples of success from the managing up part, from the organizational part, organizational culture and systems. And then this last one was a successful tale about working with an individual. Now we're going to move into talking about cautionary tales about the same kind of thing, how do we do this working up at the organizational level, and then a little bit about what do we have to take into account when we're working at the individual level. Before we do, we're going to do a quick poll. So in this one, we're talking about how confident are you in the ability of your current volunteer corps to welcome and include volunteers from newly diverse demographics. So if we can put that poll up. Gretchen, take a few minutes to answer that. Waiting for Gretchen. There it is. Please answer this again. Multiple choice, answer it truthfully.
And we've got the votes coming in, and I'll keep that open for just a moment. All right, just a few more moments and I'll keep this open.
Thank you, Gretchen, for running the tech behind the presentation.
No worries. Happy to do it. I'm also learning and listening and learning as well, so thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Very close to what we had last time. Pretty sure my volunteers are actively welcoming others. Pretty sure, about 50%. I think that we are also, I think that this is a good discussion that we're about to have because we are looking at well over 50% that are either pretty sure or worried that some volunteers might not be welcoming. So let's go ahead and talk about that and how we can help, what we need to watch out for there. And I'm going to turn that back over.
There we go. All right. Sorry, every time we switch out of a poll, it takes me a moment to get my controls back. So real quick, I'm going to go through this research as a reminder that we are going to share all of our resources with you, but also that you'll have the slide deck as well. So I wanted to bring to your attention this research by Dr. Helen Timbrell. The Association of Volunteer Managers in UK hosted an interview with her on her research, and it's really fascinating. She's diving into the experience of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic volunteers and white volunteers in 4 organizations. And this is in the UK, so BAME is the equivalent of the US BIPOC that we have. So BAME and white volunteers reported the same level of welcome during the initial onboarding process with volunteer coordinators, with volunteer engagement professionals. However, afterwards, their experiences differed wildly. And Black, Asian, and minority ethnic volunteers experienced racism and tension from within the organizations they were serving, not just the public. So they were struggling to become volunteers and to serve their communities and organizations that weren't really ready to have them participate, right? So you diversify first, and then your culture change suffers second. So in the interview, I asked Dr. Timbrell, what is it that we can do as professionals, right? So she answers, part of what volunteer managers can do is help create a space where these conversations can happen. And there's probably a step before that where volunteer managers need to build their own confidence to be able to host or facilitate these conversations. So we're hoping that this introduction to this topic gives you guys some more confidence to be able to navigate these, some research to dive into, and ways to create conversations to combat racism and promote equality, to truly build inclusion in your spaces, where our BIPOC, our Black, Asian, minority, ethnic volunteers are going to experience less prejudice and less racism based on their ethnicity and race, because we can have these conversations, we can talk about microaggressions. So change management, a quick plug here, is the management of change and the development within a business or similar organization. This is the people side of things. And the basic idea is you have to prepare your current team before you add anyone, prepare the environment you're bringing in new volunteers so you're making sure you set everyone up for success. You can take into account the time that you're going to have to reinforce your new culture so that no one backslides into old patterns of behavior. If they do backslide, you need to make sure everyone's reporting those microaggressions to you or that feeling of being unwelcome so that you can address it, like Nicole was talking about as well. I've got a certificate in change management from FROSI, but they also have free resources if you don't want to do their intensive course. And you're basically moving someone from the awareness of an issue to a desire to interact with it, giving them the knowledge and the ability they need to make the change, and then reinforcing that change so it's sustained. So those are the kinds of things you're going to need to think about in order to tackle change management so that you can truly change your culture. Nicole, I'll turn it over to you for practical exercise introduction. Nicole?
Sorry, I muted myself. You could go to the next slide. While you're doing that, I just wanted to tag on really quick to the poll. It's fascinating. And to the ones who said that they're pretty sure, I want to challenge you to be 100% sure. And the only way you can be 100% sure is if you ask or if you are witnessing it. And the only reason I say that is because I was in that same position, and then we put out a survey, and almost 15% of the survey came back that newer volunteers were not welcoming. They weren't. So in some cases, like I had mentioned before, it's not always necessarily the race and the inclusion on that aspect of it, which we did have some of that. It's heartbreaking to ask and your volunteers say, I'm not coming back because this is how I've been treated. But it just goes to that whole inclusion is not just one facet. It's not necessarily always race. It's not necessarily culture. There's so many things that it encompasses. So be aware of that. But I also just want to say, don't make the assumption, if you're not 100% sure that they are welcoming, I challenge you to find out 100%. So we're talking about all this and you're like, okay, yes, let's start. I get it. I know we need to do it. I'm going to look at myself and I'm going to start working on myself. And then, but how do I get everything started with my volunteer program? That is really, really great. And I want you to harness that energy and take it forward, but I want you to take it forward smart, because just like Paula said, you could do all this stuff to diversify. And then now if you have a culture of people who aren't ready, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. So before you take charge and start implementing things, we have a list of questions that you should ask yourself first before anything starts getting implemented. Number one, do you really, really know the demographics of your team? And something that Paula said was very important, because by law, you know, in terms of, especially when it's disability, and we were talking about 70% of disability is unseen. By law, we cannot walk up to somebody and be like, hey, so tell me your disability. Like, we can't do that. But what we do have to do is create a space where if somebody does have a disability, it's almost celebrated and not looked upon as something bad that's being brought to the team, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I'm glad that we knew that, because now we know how to talk to others who have whatever your disability is. So creating that space for people to be okay with disclosing. So by demographics, not only racially, you have age, ability, all these different things. Do you really know the demographics of your team? Have you done research on a DEAI plan? Don't just be like, woo, we're gonna do this and we're gonna just see what happens and throw it to the wall and see if it sticks. Who are you having conversations with? Have you researched different places? Some of the resources that we put are specifically DEAI plans that have been put into place, things like that. So look into those. What is the specific desired result from a DEAI training for your team? That a training for my team, a training for Paula's team, a training for Emily's team, and a training for your team are all going to look different, because the outcome is going to be different according to the need of the industry that we're in. So be aware of what you want that result to be. if you have an HR department, have you consulted with your HR department about what the whole organization is doing? Because that's awesome when you have an HR department and they're already doing, because then all you have to do is take what they did and just trickle it on down to the volunteers. But if you don't, are you talking to somebody who is HR in HR or connections? We drop some links for people who conduct DEAI trainings for SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resources Individuals. I mean, at this point, if you know somebody, like connect with somebody on LinkedIn and tell them what you want to do, and you just need to hear, you know, you want a voice because you're a smaller organization, but we just don't want to jump into this. But that HR component is extremely important because you don't want to, it's that whole intent versus impact. You don't want to try to intend to do something and the impact is so bad that now you're getting sued. But I don't say that to scare you. I say that to be vigilant about your research and know what you're doing before you move forward. Have you consulted a DEAI specialist about your training plan? Who are your supporters? Who are your champions for the training plan? So this can't just be about you. It has to be like, who else is with you on this, especially if it's going to be permeating through the organization. Who is at the table? Who isn't at the table? We kind of talked about that before. Whose voice is not being heard or being represented in the plan? And am I prepared to handle resistance? Oh, wait. I can't, the little box, there it is, to change. The little chat box popped up and right over the last word. Are you prepared to handle resistance to change? Because it's going to happen. And what do you have in place to be prepared to handle that? Don't go into this and just think it's all gonna like, oh my gosh, okay, I tried it and then I did this and woo, it worked. It's kind of like that whole, you know, have you ever gone up to somebody and apologized to them and they were like, so? You were like, what? Wait, no, that's not how this was supposed to go. I say, I'm sorry. You say, it's okay. I forgive you. We hug, we go. People, you're gonna say, I'm sorry. And people are gonna be like, I don't want your sorry. How do you handle that when that happens? So just a couple of things for you to think about. And again, we power packed your resource page to help address all of these questions.
All right, Emily, you want to take us through the last few slides?
Sure. So, you know, having heard all that, we know that this is quite a heavy lift. We're talking about managing up, change management. We're talking about all the preparatory questions and soul searching that we have to do about our programs before we can even start working on this, on DEAI and our organization and our volunteer groups. So what can you do now? Where can we start? Obviously with those questions. But there are also some powerful things that you can start with right now. Obviously, I think it's pretty obvious. We've talked about it a lot. It's in the name of this webinar. The first thing that I think is most important is for each of us to learn more about diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, about microaggressions, about cultural humility, about all of these things. That's going to be on that resource page that we send out. I think we've repeated it several times. It's about being confident in your own understanding and your own cultural humility work and your own ability to understand these issues. That's number one, is, you know, gain your confidence. But there's also other things that you can do. You can start in areas where you have control, where you have the power to make change. And a lot of times they seem small, but they aren't. So one of the definite quick areas that we can start with is in our training and orientations. Include discussions about DEAI, about microaggressions, about the policies that you have within your organization and the policies that you've created within your volunteer program regarding DEAI, regarding harassment, regarding things like that. talk about it from this DEAI lens, and then also talk about cultural competency and cultural humility. And use that in your orientation for your new volunteers, but also pull it into the trainings that you give for your current volunteers. And that's a way, again, to bring them along to work on some of those issues that we had talked about before. One of the things that you'll find in your in the resources that we share with you are 2 handouts. One talks about cultural humility and how you can include that in your orientations and training. And another is an actual exercise that you can work on and present to your volunteers. Goes a lot to the video that we saw, the TED Talk that we saw earlier about understanding your own biases, your own unconscious biases and things like that. Really good exercises, a really good exercise for you to use. Recruitment. Make sure your language is inclusive of all groups, but not just your language. The media that you use when you try to recruit, the formats that you use. Remember again that you're trying to make this as broad as possible to include as many diverse demographics that you want to include in your recruitment plan. And it's really important to do this strategically and to plan it out. So one of the good ways to do this is, I think Nicole touched upon this in her example of success. So make sure you talk to people who will be able to give you some idea of how you might recruit from that particular, let's say, demographic. Hear from them, perhaps a volunteer or a colleague. Listen to other people to see what is the best way for us to reach these diverse populations. Transformative volunteerism is a really important, I think it's really important, but that's something that I actually work on a lot, is transformative volunteerism. Transformative volunteerism is a way of reframing, excuse me, the start and end point of all volunteer service. And really what that means is this: the act of volunteering has the potential to be transformative for both the volunteer and the organization. It's not about the transaction of the volunteer gives you time and in repay, they get a certain benefit. This is about actually changing, transforming deeply the way that they look at the world, their values, their beliefs. And to do that, that is the role of the volunteer manager in something called transformative volunteer management. What can we do to make sure that every volunteer has that opportunity to be transformed? It includes holistic orientations that cover everything that really grab the volunteer. It includes all of the cultural humility things that we're talking about, self-reflection, time to dialogue, listening to your volunteers, including them, as I just was saying, as far as recruitment, and how we make our policies, our programs, design our job descriptions, things like that. There is a lot more information about transformative volunteerism and transformative volunteer management. And if you want to get some more of that information, please let us know and we can share that with you as well. Finally, and this is also important, and we touch upon this, redirect individual volunteers. When you're working with a volunteer and an issue comes up, an issue of microaggression or unwelcoming language, deal with them. Do not let it go. This is important for you to be able to deal with it. Again, you're the volunteer coordinator or the volunteer manager. This is part of your job. This is it with your power, within your power. And this is also a place where you can start making change. So if we can go on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about that. So what do you do if there is an individual who may have offended somebody, a microaggression, intentional, or most likely unintentional? What can you do? Paula gave a great example of how you can handle this. Handle the situation privately. Explain the offense, listen to the response. Give them the opportunity to apologize, listen, and to learn. Sometimes that might mean, if this is a one-on-one situation, you're bringing in the person who was offended so that everybody can have a facilitated conversation about what happened, why was the person offended, and where the person who did the offending, where they came from. It's also important to know what not to do with the person who may have offended. Do not call them out for public judgment. As we talked about in that very first diagram, we are pulling somebody out of their comfort zone, right? When we are talking to them privately or in public, but we are always pulling them out of their comfort zone to explain to them how what they said may have been a microaggression or offended somebody. That puts them into their fear zone, right? If you call them out in public, their defenses will go out. They will not learn. They are in a defensive mode at that point. So please don't call somebody out in public for something that they may have done. Do not make assumptions about them. Do not think that this was intentional. Remember, they are coming from their own cultural identities, from their own biases that they may not be aware of. Remember that whole thing about unconscious bias. This is our opportunity to respectfully, so don't disrespect them, to respectfully help them reflect on why they said what they said. This is that cultural humility part about helping them be open to hearing and learning about why they said what they said, why what they said was offensive. So are there any questions about this? Because I think this is really important. We work on so many levels as volunteer managers and coordinators. We can't forget that some of these really small one-on-one things are really, really important.
And I just want to tag on to what Emily is saying on that absolute thing really quick, is that at the end of the day, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to fail forward. I am in this position because we had a volunteer who called up who was blind and asked, can she volunteer at the center? And I was like, I have nothing here for you. Like, you can't see how, I'm not sure how I was nice about it, but I was absolutely wrong. And my senior management, they were like, yeah, nope, not the right answer. Let's get you some training. And now I have a whole new thing. But if that would have never happened, I wouldn't be here. So don't be afraid, even if intent and impact and it does hurt, learn from it and learn not to hurt again in the future. But don't use it as an excuse to not move forward. So just remember all of this, it's baby steps, taking one little step at a time. And I use the analogy that even if, you take one step a day for 365 days, at least you are now 365 steps further than you were. That may have gotten you from your front door to the front yard, but at least you're not at the front door anymore. So don't beat yourself up if you're not as far as where you want to go. Just take small steps. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, learn from it. And a year from now, a month from now, a week from now, you're going to be further along what you were. And that's making us all better in our goal to become more exclusive. Oh my God, inclusive. to become more inclusive and diverse in what we're trying to do. I'm just
Interesting.
quiet now.
Interesting slip there, Nicole. Exactly.
I know.
Well, and I think that to carry on with that, Nicole, is that that idea of taking small steps is also what we want to share with our volunteers and with our staff, that we keep those expectations that we are taking one step, we are making changes one at a time. And I love that 365 days. If you take a step, 365 days, one step each day, you're 365 days ahead of yourself. I mean, steps ahead of yourself. That is great because you learn how to do that. And then you can also share that and use that when you're working with your volunteers and your staff and even your management. So anything is in the good direction. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We still have a lot of time left for some questions. We will be sending out our document with our links and references. And if there's anything more that you would like to send for us to send out or give to you, please let us know. The webinar has been recorded and will be posted in the archive for Alive members to view at any time.
I think Gretchen said that there weren't any questions. If you do think of any later, I dropped the link to our LinkedIn discussion group in the chat. So click on that. If you have questions, we'll be more than happy to continue the conversation in LinkedIn. And we'll be more than happy to help and answer any questions if you think about any that come up a little bit later.
So
Nicole?
we're going to turn this back over to Rose's slides to wrap up the end of the webinar. But keep talking.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole, Emily, and Paula. That was amazing. We so appreciate your time today. You know, it's such an important topic, and I'm really pleased that you could share your practical knowledge with all of us, particularly as an emerging volunteer professional. It's been in. I do have a couple of announcements for everybody. First, be sure and save the date for the next Alive Academy webinars on May 12th at 2 p.m. EST. Alana Notpow will be presenting Saying No to the Wrong Things so we can say yes to the right things. And on June 23rd at 1 p.m., Sue Carter-Kale will be presenting the Volunteer Value Proposition, Capturing Numbers and Impact. I want to remind everybody, volunteer positions at Alive are always open. Make a difference in the field by joining us. Getting involved in a community is a wonderful way to build your own network while contributing to the national conversation about volunteer engagement. And again, as always, our website is www.volunteeralive.org. And I'm ready for the final slide. Thank you very much for spending your time with us today again, and I hope you'll join us for the next Academy webinar on May 12th with Alana Notpow. And everybody's contact information, the presenter's contact information is at the bottom of this slide. Thank you.
Do we have any questions, Gretchen?
No, I don't see any, but a comment about it being very beneficial, and thank you to everyone.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's really good. We will be sending out a survey after, a satisfaction survey after, correct?
Yep.
Good. Also, I was wondering, Nicole, if you could say a little bit more to those people who are left here about the LinkedIn, so that people may not know that we have this and that we can continue our conversations there.
Yes. So in LinkedIn, I'm making sure I'm getting the right one. We have a group. Alive has a group, and for all of these conversations, we are trying to post ahead of time. I'm looking for the right one. That's why I'm not looking at the screen. But we're before all of these conversations, you are welcome to, if there's questions that you would like to be addressed, if there's questions just even based on the title that you're like, oh, I want to make sure this gets addressed, you can drop it in there. And we send that information to the person who is hosting to make sure that they are able to address it. And then again, like today, if we happen to run out of time, or you go to start implementing and you're like, well, what happens if, we encourage you to go back to the LinkedIn post that we have and continue the chat there. And it is the one that is in Alive, and it's ALIVE. It's the Alive group, not the Alive not the Alive page, but look for the group Alive, and it's the ALIVE. And every time somebody posts something there, we will get a notification so we can go back and answer any questions that may have come up. And with that being said, find me on LinkedIn. Let's connect in general. So you don't even have to be, if you don't necessarily find the group, you can find us. We are all on LinkedIn. And it says, can someone link it in the chat? The group, the LinkedIn group, I put it in the chat earlier. I'll see if I can find it and do it again. Okay. And then as far as we are all on LinkedIn, connect with us.
Right.
Don't let this be the beginning of a beautiful friendship, not the first, not the end of something that has happened. So, and in terms of making mistakes, you saw my classic mix-up, right? Coming from talking about being excluded by the Black Latina chick, like that was classic. It couldn't get any better than that. But we're all gonna make mistakes. You just recover and keep on going. So.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll end here, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Academy webinar.
Bye. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.